I remember how excited my father was when he began accepting friends requests on Facebook. He called my little brother and I into the kitchen, where he sat smiling into his laptop, clicking through various profile photos of his now adult childhood friends, rambling on and on about their adventurous childhood experiences, speaking as if they were still children. He described their relationship as a band of brothers who did everything together. They were a motley crew of diverse races, religions, and socioeconomic backgrounds. His entourage looked like the cast from Sesame Street, of course without the fur. Soon his childhood reminiscing turned to pointing out how old everyone looked. "Man, they've gotten so old," he said repeatedly, somehow excluding himself from that experience. My brother and I left as our small kitchen was becoming overcrowded with his swelling head and ego. Sometimes I think Facebook needs a magical before and after mirror app that allows adults to see themselves before they are able to view the profile of their old friends. In a short time after he moved past the photo album, he began reading through the posting and comments on his friend's wall. "What, he voted for him?" we heard him shout from the kitchen. "Oh my God, what happened to you, man? Why do you believe that crap? You didn't used to be this way," yelling at the pixelated image of his best friend from middle school. It seemed that both my dad and his friends had grown up and no longer shared the same view of the world. Facebook was not the reunion my dad had hoped for, but instead had become that aforementioned mirror app. It didn't just reflect how close he and his friends once were, but it also showed how much they had grown apart. Many of those Facebook profiles had become placeholders for old memories, rather than old friends reconnecting. Perhaps as we get older, we begin to believe that everything we have learned is true and absolute, and we close ourselves off to other possibilities. Maybe children are more open to other points of view because adults are good at making us keenly aware that we have much to learn. When my father and his friends were children, they bonded over the things that connected them, the things they had in common. As adults, that bond was broken as they became aware of the things that separated them, and those things became borders. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. This Latin phrase is our nation's de facto motto. It audaciously asserts the idea that a collection of individuals can live and thrive together as one. That in spite of a multitude of differences, which include but is not limited to race, religion, social economics, gender, intelligence, politics, and sexual orientation, we can collectively thrive and stand strong and flourish, connected as a whole, rather than perish in our disconnectedness. We can become stronger by diversity, rather than weakened by fragmentation. Consider a jigsaw puzzle. The goal of a jigsaw puzzle is to connect the interlocking pieces together to create a big picture. A picture that often matches the smaller image seen on the puzzle box cover. The pieces in the box come in various color, shapes, and sizes. Again, the puzzle is complete only when all the pieces are connected, creating one image that matches the image on the box. The dream for a strong nation is equal to a picture on a puzzle box. It is a dream that can only be realized when the citizens of that nation are connected and unified. When we connect our many talents, skills, and knowledge, we fulfill our vision for a great nation. Woven in the fabric of our great nation is a desire and need to unite. However, often, we trip up over what separates us, so much so that we struggle desperately to move from a place of separateness to togetherness. Many have lost the basic childlike ability to find common ground. Adults may think they are smarter than children are, but children know how to unite around a common theme. In fact, most of our issues are resolved with Minecraft. History has shown that it has been our ability to connect and unify that has made us a great nation. It is when we are united that we soar like the beautiful bald eagle that represents us. Each of our victories finds its root in our ability to set aside our differences and come together. Unity has the cure for many American conflicts and the root of some of our major victories. It has been bipartisan compromises that has helped shape our country into a great nation. In fact, perhaps our nation's greatest compromise was the Great Compromise. In 1787, delegates to the Constitutional Convention came from different backgrounds and held different political views. They argued about how many representatives each state should be allowed. The larger states favored the Virginia Plan. According to the Virginia Plan, each state would have a different number of representatives based on the state's population. The smaller states favored the New Jersey Plan. According to the New Jersey Plan, the number of representatives would be the same for each state. A delegate from Connecticut, Roger Sherman, proposed a two-house legislature consisting of a Senate and House of Representatives. The Senate would have an equal number of representatives from each state. This would satisfy the states with smaller populations. The House of Representatives would include one representative for each 30,000 individuals in a state. This pleased the states with larger populations. This two-house legislature plan worked for all states and became known as the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise saved the Constitutional Convention and probably the Union. 73 years later, in 1860, after winning the Republican nomination and going on to win the presidency, President Abraham Lincoln appointed all three of his Republican primary rivals to his cabinet. Later, he added a Democrat, Edwin Stanton, as his Secretary of War. Lincoln's so-called team of rivals had come to be seen as a watershed political moment, as Lincoln himself explained to a newspaper reporter. He felt he had no right to deprive the country of its strongest minds, simply because they sometimes disagreed with him. In 1945, after President Franklin D. Roosevelt died in office, his running mate, Harry Truman, succeeded to the presidency. Shortly after taking the office, Democrat President Truman was faced with an open Supreme Court seat. While naming a Democrat to the seat likely would have been approved, Truman broke with his party and instead chose Republican Ohio Senator Harold Burton for the court. It was an olive branch to congressional Republicans and a chance for a new president to find common ground with the congressional opposition. In 1964, after many years of struggle, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was enacted. It was one of the most important civil rights laws in the history of the United States. It outlawed discrimination, ended racial segregation, and protected the voting rights of minorities and women. With civil rights marches and racial violence dominating the news, the issue of African Americans' legal rights can no longer be ignored. A civil rights bill proposed by congressional Democrats and supported by the White House had just passed the House of Representatives when, in early 1964, the Senate took it up for debate and led to what became the longest filibuster in Senate history. The Senate's Democratic leaders needed Republican votes to stop the filibuster. Democratic Majority Leader Mike Mansfield asked his counterpart, Republican Senator Everett Dirksen, to step in. I appeal to the distinguished minority leader, whose patriotism has always taken precedence over his partisanship, to join with me in finding the Senate's best contribution to the resolution of this grave national issue, Mansfield said. Dirksen did more than join with Mansfield. He exhorted his colleagues to end not just the filibuster, but America's difficult past and bring the Civil Rights Act to a vote. I appeal to all senators, he told the chamber. We are confronted with a moral issue. Today, let us not be found wanting. With Dirksen's leadership, 27 Republican senators joined 44 Democrats Democrats to end debate on June 10, 1964. The bill passed 9 days later. In the years that followed, there were more unifying compromises that helped to shape our society for the better. It was compromise that helped to put a man on the moon in 1964. It was compromise that created the Endangered Species Act of 1973. In 1977, it was compromise that gave rise to the food stamp program that, according to the Census Bureau, feeds 1 out of 5 American children. In 1983, Social Security reform was born of compromise, as well as the 1986 Tax Reform Act. In 1990, while Americans had elected a disabled man as president in 1932, it was not until almost 70 years later that the rights of people like President Franklin D. Roosevelt became protected under law. The Americans with Disabilities Act, which makes it illegal to discriminate based on disability, was signed into law by President H.W. Bush in 1990. The landmark civil rights legislation had been difficult to pass. However, with critics claiming that disabled individuals were being accommodated unnecessarily and would cause an undue burden on employers. Seeing the need to protect a minority from discrimination, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle came together to pass the Americans with Disabilities Act. There was compromise in 1995 when the Blue Dog Democrats were formed. 1996, welfare reform. 1997, CHIP. 2001, No Child Left Behind. Then there was September 11th, 2001. Just a year before I was born, terrorists attacked our nation. The terrorists who carried out the massive attacks of September 11th, 2001, hoped for death and destruction. The bodies of 3,000 plus Americans can attest to that, but their plans to cower America and weaken our government were thwarted almost from the moment the first hijacked airline hit. Through the tears of shock and sorrow, American citizens united in a show of unprecedented national resolve. It was an attack on the things we hold most dear, and it shook America out of an almost decade-long political schism. In Congress, planned parliamentary obstacles and committee objections were forgotten as members gathered on the Capitol's east steps to sing God Bless America, not for the cameras, but for each other. Retail stores struggled to keep up with the demand for American flags as our citizens felt an urgency, not seen in generations, to remind each other of what unites us. Yes, to remind each other of what unites us. Perhaps that is what we need now, to be reminded of who we are and what makes us a great nation. To be reminded of our triumphs and that unity has been the sine qua non, the indispensable force that has fueled our great American victories. Do you remember that Facebook Mirror app I mentioned earlier? The one that allows us to see ourselves before we are able to see others? Sometimes it's good to recognize that we ourselves aren't perfect and that all of us are striving to perfect our individual lives and our nation. When we recognize our experiences and as we see our hopes and dreams reflected in others, we realize that they are no different from us. Often, they are only contributing in the way they believe to be meritorious. Often, they are only trying to better their lives in our country. Of course, there are varying opinions as to how we do that. But rather than dismiss ideas and opinions of others we disagree with as praise, why not merge our best practices? Why not find a common ground where we can stand united? I urge you, remember what connects us as a people, rather than focus on what divides our nation. Perhaps it is time to stop looking at life through high-definition lenses, only detecting differences. Sometimes pixelated fuzziness offers a better view. If you're looking for a place to start, follow our lead. Try Minecraft.